Have you ever watched an interview that began with smiles, applause, and warm memories, only to leave everyone in the room completely speechless? Some moments on television become unforgettable because nobody sees them coming. 1 minute, it's a celebration. The next, it's a conversation that seems to unravel years of unresolved emotion right before the cameras. That's the story we're exploring today. What appeared to be an ordinary appearance on Kelly Clarkson's daytime show allegedly turned into one of the most uncomfortable celebrity exchanges fans have ever talked about. Supporters of both women have debated what happened ever since, asking the same question: how could two artists with so much mutual history end up on opposite sides of such an emotional conversation? Whether the tension was built on misunderstanding, wounded pride, or years of assumptions, one thing is certain: when emotions that have been buried for years finally surface, they rarely stay under control. As the studio lights came up, everything looked exactly as viewers expected. The audience applauded enthusiastically as Kelly welcomed Reba McEntire with her trademark warmth. The atmosphere felt relaxed, almost celebratory. It was another high-profile interview featuring one of country music's most recognizable names, and everyone expected stories, laughter, and memories from decades in the industry. Kelly greeted her with genuine excitement. She spoke about Reba's latest project, praised her career, and reflected on the duet they had recorded together years before. Her words sounded sincere, and the audience responded with approving applause. For a brief moment, everything felt effortless, but then something changed. Reba smiled politely, yet there was a hesitation before she answered. Instead of immediately returning the compliment, she quietly remarked that people often remember the past differently, and it actually happened. The sentence wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it landed with enough weight that even the audience seemed to notice the shift. Kelly paused for only a second before continuing. Trying to keep the conversation comfortable, she spoke about how meaningful the collaboration had been and how much respect she'd always had for Reba throughout her career. Again, the response wasn't what anyone expected. Reba repeated one particular word: respect. This time there was an unmistakable sharpness in her voice. She suggested that what the public believed about their collaboration wasn't the complete story. The smiles around the studio slowly faded. Kelly looked genuinely surprised. She admitted she wasn't sure what Reba meant, and gently suggested that, if there had ever been a misunderstanding between them, she wished it could have been discussed privately instead of during a televised interview. That only seemed to make things worse. Reba replied that private conversations had already been attempted. According to her, she'd tried reaching out through different channels over the years, but never felt the issue had been properly addressed. Whether those attempts actually happened exactly as described remains part of the larger debate surrounding the story, but in that moment, the statement completely changed the tone of the interview. Kelly's expression shifted from confusion to concern. She insisted she had never knowingly ignored any attempt to communicate, and wondered if messages had simply failed to reach her. Rather than easing the tension, that explanation appeared to deepen it. Reba began describing what she believed had happened after their duet became successful. She suggested that public conversations surrounding the project gradually focused more on Kelly's creative contributions than on the collaboration itself. In her view, interviews and promotional appearances slowly created a story that didn't accurately reflect how the project had come together. Kelly looked stunned. She immediately rejected the suggestion that she ever tried to take credit for someone else's work. She explained that she had always viewed the song as a true partnership and believed both artists had contributed equally. For a moment, it seemed like the disagreement might simply be the result of different memories, but then the conversation moved beyond memories. It became personal. Reba questioned how the collaboration had been described in later interviews. She argued that, intentionally or not, the public narrative often made it sound as though Kelly had introduced something entirely new to country music, while Reba's decades of experience became little more than background context. Kelly shook her head almost immediately. She insisted she had never intended to create that impression. From her perspective, every interview had been an opportunity to express admiration for someone she considered one of her musical inspirations. She emphasized that she had entered the collaboration hoping to learn, not to teach, yet Reba remained unconvinced. She explained that respect wasn't simply about compliments. To her, Respect meant carefully considering how stories are told after the work is finished. It meant making sure that public praise never unintentionally diminished another artist's role. Around the studio, the audience had become almost completely silent. The usual laughter that fills daytime television had disappeared. People leaned forward in their seats, unsure whether they were witnessing an honest conversation or the beginning of something much more serious. Kelly continued trying to understand where the frustration was coming from. She admitted that promotional interviews often focus on personal experiences because journalists naturally ask artists what they themselves contributed to a project. She believed she had simply answered those questions honestly. Reba saw it differently. She argued that even honest answers can shape public perception. If one person's perspective dominates every interview, eventually that version becomes accepted as fact, regardless of anyone else's intentions. The conversation had quietly transformed into something much larger than one duet. Now it was about legacy, recognition, ownership, and how history remembers creative partnerships. Kelly's voice became more emotional. She reminded Reba that she spent weeks preparing before they worked together. She talked about studying Reba's catalog, respecting her accomplishments, and wanting to honor everything she'd achieved in country music. Those words sounded heartfelt, but they didn't seem to erase years of lingering disappointment. Instead, Reba raised another issue. She questioned promotional materials connected to the project, suggesting that marketing decisions had contributed to the feeling that the collaboration centered more heavily on Kelly, and it should have. Kelly quickly responded that artists rarely control those kinds of promotional choices. Record labels, marketing departments, and publicity teams often make decisions independently. She insisted she had never directed any campaign designed to minimize Reba's contribution. Still, by now, neither woman appeared satisfied with the other's explanation. One believed intent mattered most, the other believed impact mattered more. And sometimes those two things don't tell the same story. The audience could sense the emotional distance growing wider with every exchange. What had started as polite disagreement was slowly becoming something neither side seemed able to stop. Neither woman was shouting. Not yet, but every answer carried a little more frustration than the one before. Every explanation created another disagreement instead of resolving the previous one. And everyone watching could feel that the interview was heading somewhere no one had expected. Kelly leaned forward, determined to keep the discussion from slipping any further. She spoke carefully, choosing every word with obvious caution. "I've always admired you," she explained. "Long before we ever worked together, I saw you as someone who helped define country music. Nothing I've ever said was meant to suggest otherwise." For just a moment, it looked as though those words might calm the room. Instead, Reba slowly shook her head. "The problem isn't whether you admired me," she replied. "The problem is what happened after everyone stopped listening to me and started listening only to the version of events that followed you." The audience remained completely silent. Even the crew behind the cameras appeared frozen. Daytime television usually moved with an easy rhythm, light-hearted stories, applause, laughter between commercial breaks. This felt entirely different. Kelly tried another approach. "If that's how any interview came across," she said softly, "then I'm truly sorry. But intention matters. I never wanted anyone to believe I carried that project on my own." Reba answered almost immediately, "But perception matters too." Her voice wasn't louder. It was steadier. "When millions of people hear the same message over and over, eventually that message becomes history." Kelly looked genuinely puzzled. "What message?" Reba didn't hesitate. "The idea that you brought something new while I simply represented the past." Kelly frowned. "I don't think I ever presented it that way. Maybe not directly," Reba answered, "but stories aren't built only from what people say. They're built from what people repeatedly emphasize." The conversation had reached a point where neither woman was arguing over facts alone. They were arguing over interpretation. One believed the words had been respectful. The other believed the overall picture had quietly become disrespectful. Those aren't always the same thing. Kelly rested her hands together, taking a slow breath. "You know how interviews work," she explained. "Hosts ask what each artist contributed. They ask what inspired the collaboration. They ask how different styles came together. I answered those questions from my perspective." "It was always your perspective." Kelly looked surprised. "What was I supposed to do?" Reba answered without missing a beat. Share the spotlight. Another long silence settled across the studio. Kelly searched for the right words. I thought I did. You thought you did. Reba repeated, but I never felt it. Those 6 words carried more emotion than anything either woman had said up to that point. For the first time, Kelly stopped trying to defend herself. Instead, she simply listened. The audience could see the emotion beginning to appear in her expression. Not anger, not yet, confusion, disappointment. Maybe even guilt over something she still wasn't convinced had happened the way it was being described. She finally spoke. Again, if you felt overlooked, I honestly wish I'd known. Reba looked back without changing her expression. I shouldn't have needed to tell you. That answer landed hard. Kelly blinked. What do you mean? Reba folded her hands. When you work beside someone who's spent decades building a career, you pay attention to how the story gets told afterward. Kelly nodded slowly. I understand that. No. Reba answered. I don't think you do. Another uncomfortable pause. Kelly's voice became firmer. I can't take responsibility for every article someone writes. I'm not asking you to. I can't rewrite every headline. I'm not asking you to. I can't control every interviewer. I'm not asking you to. Kelly finally stopped. Then what are you asking? Reba looked directly at her. I'm asking whether, even once, you stopped to think how it felt from my side. The question lingered. There wasn't an immediate answer. Kelly looked down for several seconds before speaking again. I did think about you. I don't think you thought enough. That exchange completely shifted the energy. The conversation no longer sounded like two entertainers discussing publicity. It sounded like two people describing completely different emotional realities. Kelly's composure began slipping. I've spent my career trying to support other artists. I know, Reba answered. Then why are we even having this conversation? Because supporting people publicly and making them feel respected privately aren't always the same thing. Kelly looked genuinely hurt. I would never intentionally make you feel disrespected. I believe that, Reba admitted, but intention doesn't erase consequences. The room became impossibly quiet. Even people watching from home could almost imagine a silence inside the studio. Kelly leaned back in her chair. You keep saying I created a narrative. Because that's what happened. But I never sat down and planned one. Most narratives aren't planned. Reba replied. They grow. Kelly sighed. So what you're saying is that I accidentally became the center of a story that should have belonged to both of us. I'm saying you allowed it to happen. Kelly looked frustrated now. And what exactly was I supposed to do every time someone asked me about that song? Reba answered calmly. Remind people that no collaboration belongs to one artist. I did. Not enough. I praised you. But you highlighted yourself. I explained my creative process. And forgot the back and forth had become almost impossible to escape. Every explanation met another criticism. Every clarification uncovered another misunderstanding. Kelly finally spoke with more emotion than before. I can't apologize for talking about my own experience. I'm not asking you to apologize for existing. Reba replied. I'm asking you to recognize that someone else's experience existed too. Kelly stared across the table. I've never believed this was a competition. Reba answered quietly. I know. But sometimes competition happens even when only one person realizes. 8. Kelly's eyebrows tightened. I don't think we were ever competing. Maybe not professionally. Then what? Reba paused before answering. For history. That sentence seemed to catch everyone off guard. The way people remember things matters. She continued. Eventually interviews disappear. Articles disappear. But the stories survive. Kelly nodded slowly. I agree. And stories shape legacies. I agree with that too. Then you understand why this matters. Kelly hesitated. I understand why it matters. To you. Reba looked disappointed. That's still not the same as understanding. Kelly exhaled deeply. She could feel the conversation slipping further away. Everything she said seemed to create another misunderstanding instead of resolving one. For the first time, a hint of frustration entered her voice. I don't know how many different ways I can tell you that I respected you. Reba answered almost instantly. Respect isn't something you announce, it's something people feel. Kelly looked away for a moment. When she turned back, there was moisture beginning to gather in her eyes. I honestly thought you felt it. Reba's expression softened for the briefest moment. So did I. That answer seemed to change everything. Because suddenly, beneath all the disagreement, Viewers could see something else. Neither woman sounded like someone arguing over a song anymore. They sounded like two people mourning the loss of trust, and once trust begins to disappear, every memory starts looking different depending on who's telling the story. Neither of them realized it yet, that the conversation was about to reach the point where calm explanations would no longer be enough. The emotional restraint both women had maintained since the interview began was beginning to crack, and what happened next would leave everyone in the studio stunned. Kelly lowered her eyes for a moment, gathering herself before speaking again. I don't want this to become something neither of us can take back. Her voice was quieter now, almost pleading. If I've unintentionally hurt you, then I want to understand it. I really do. For the first time since the conversation began, Reba didn't answer immediately. She studied Kelly for several long seconds. There was disappointment in her expression, but there was something else to fatigue. The kind that comes from carrying the same frustration for years. You still don't see it, Reba finally said. Kelly looked back. Then help me. I've been trying. No, Kelly replied. You've been telling me what you think I did. I'm asking you to tell me why it hurt so much. Another heavy silence settled over the studio. The audience barely moved. Even the usual sounds from cameras and stage equipment seemed distant. Reba slowly folded her arms. When you've spent decades building something, she began, you become protective of it. She wasn't talking only about music anymore. She was talking about legacy. Every album, every performance, every late night on the road. It becomes part of who you are. Then one day people start talking about your work as if it only became relevant after someone new arrived. Kelly immediately shook her head. I never believed that. I'm telling you how it felt. Kelly opened her mouth, then stopped herself. She simply nodded. Reba continued. I watched interviews. I watched clips online. I read articles. Over time, I started feeling like our collaboration had become another chapter in your story, instead of ours. Kelly answered carefully. I can't. It would have. Kelly leaned back slowly. I honestly don't know how to defend myself against something I never intended, Reba answered with surprising calm. Maybe that's the problem. Kelly frowned. What does that mean? It means you've spent this entire conversation defending your intentions. She paused. I've spent it explaining my experience. Those words seemed to stop Kelly completely. For several seconds she didn't speak. She simply stared across the table. Finally, she nodded. I can accept that your experience was different. Reba looked at her without changing expression. But, Kelly, sigh, but I can't accept being described as someone who deliberately tried to take credit for your work. I didn't say deliberate. It certainly sounded deliberate. It felt deliberate. The distinction was small, but emotionally, it was enormous. Kelly rubbed her forehead. So we're arguing over feelings instead of facts? Reba answered almost immediately. Feelings usually begin with facts. Kelly looked frustrated. No, they begin with interpretation. The audience could sense both women becoming more emotional with every sentence. Neither one was shouting yet, but every response carried more weight than the last. Kelly's voice became firmer. I've spent years trying to build a reputation for supporting artists. I know, I've never wanted success at someone else's expense. I hope that's true. Kelly blinked. You hope? Reba nodded slowly. Because that's not how it looked from where I was standing. Kelly's patience finally began slipping. So what was I supposed to do? Reba didn't hesitate. Recognize that collaborations aren't just about recording a song, they're about relationships. Kelly answered quickly. I thought we had one. So did I. Those three words hit even harder than before. Kelly looked genuinely shaken. I don't understand how we ended up here. Reba's answer came almost as a whisper. Neither do I. For a brief moment, it seemed like both women might finally find common ground. The tension eased ever so slightly. Several audience members visibly relaxed. Maybe this conversation would end.